Mark Lassoff. Welcome back to the channel. I teach people to become professional web and mobile developers and designers. If you're becoming a professional developer, I hope you'll subscribe to the channel where I provide tutorials, workshops, projects, and advice for new developers. Over the years, I've taught coding, development, and design to over 2 million people online. Today, we're talking about becoming a self-taught developer, learning your skills through tutorials, books, online courses, and a lot of hard work. I've got 7 tips to help you become a successful, self-taught software engineer. By the way, like most people in the field, I use the terms engineer and developer interchangeably. So don't get confused, I am talking about the same job. All right, so let's start our tips. Tip number 1. Create your learning roadmap based on what people are hiring for, not what people are talking about. About a decade ago, a framework called Ruby on Rails was taking the world by storm. Everyone was talking about this new, easy-to-use, and powerful framework for building web applications. At the time, boot camps and online courses couldn't produce material about Ruby on Rails fast enough. It seemed if you didn't become a Ruby on Rails developer, you wouldn't have a career. It was all developers could talk about, until it wasn't. 18 months later, you were hearing much less about Ruby on Rails. Sure, there were some great web apps created using the framework, and it's actually still used today, but massive numbers of jobs for Ruby on Rails developers never materialized. Today, there are about 3,500 Ruby on Rails jobs listed. And that sounds like a lot until you see that there are 75,000 jobs listed for JavaScript developers. Sometimes the languages getting all the hype in online forums and in meetup groups aren't the ones that people are hiring for. A few months ago, I made a video about the languages companies were actually hiring for. I'll leave a link below. You can use sites like Indeed to check how many jobs are posted. Focus on technologies that companies are hiring for, and remember that it's not always the sexy languages, frameworks, and libraries that everyone is talking about. Tip 2, use the right tooling. For some jobs, the tools are as important as the languages. In settings where you'll be working on projects as part of a larger team, they'll have a preferred set of tools they use for developments. Candidates who already use these tools will have a leg up in the hiring process. Preferred tool sets often change faster than languages do, so keep up with what's being used in enterprise environments. You definitely want to understand a code repository and versioning tool like GitHub, a prototyping tool like Figma, and a package manager like Brew. Some more complex environments might use an end-to-end DevOps tool, like in Microsoft environments, Azure DevOps Server. In the next tip, we'll actually talk more about GitHub. Tip number 3, start a GitHub account for your learning right away. As I just mentioned, Git is a code repository and a version control tool. GitHub is an online social version of Git where code can be easily shared with others. You might be surprised that many developers don't treat their code as secret and proprietary. And that's because much of the software world is open source oriented. You're actually encouraged to copy code that's already been written and share your code with others. The reason to start a free GitHub account now is to show your progress from the beginning to the end of your self-taught journey. I'd recommend that you save everything in GitHub so you can show a hiring manager how you progressed in coding on your own. You'll need to demonstrate that your education was thorough and you didn't miss any topics that were important. You'll do that through a portfolio of projects and also through your GitHub account. I usually recommend that new developers create 2 types of portfolios. The first is a standard web portfolio, and the other is a GitHub code portfolio where your code can be reviewed. Tip number 4, focus on going deep instead of going wide. Many new developers make the mistake of thinking that they need to learn 3 different languages, a whole bunch of libraries, and every development tool out there. I'd actually suggest you resist the urge to learn many different languages and technologies, and instead learn a few very well. In the program I teach, we go deep into JavaScript. It's the most important language to know for web developers, and it's broad and flexible. It can be used on the client side and the server side as Node.js. Knowing JavaScript well is critical for new web developers, and as I mentioned earlier, there are 75,000 jobs currently open for JavaScript, so knowing JavaScript just makes sense. I'd recommend learning JavaScript as well as you can instead of doing something like learning some JavaScript, some Python, and more of something else. Hiring managers are looking for depth and the ability to get productive work done quickly. Deep understanding of a language does that better than being a generalist and knowing a little about a lot. If you're looking to work for large companies, it may not be JavaScript, but perhaps C# for the Microsoft environment or enterprise Java that you learn. Whatever you choose as your primary language, learn it well and build out complete projects using that technology. Depending on the primary language that you choose, there are likely to be other related technologies that you have to learn as well. For example, if you learn JavaScript as your primary language, you'll have to learn HTML and CSS to get hired. If you learn PHP, you'll likely also have to learn the SQL database language to get hired for a first job. Hey, before we go any further, I'd like to know, what do you think? Are these tips useful? Do you have any tips of your own that others watching could use? Use the comments below to list any tips that you have that would be useful for new developers. And let's go on to tip number 5, learn vanilla coding well. Don't focus on libraries yet. When we talk about a vanilla language, we're talking about the base language unaided by frameworks or libraries. For example, jQuery is the most popular library used with JavaScript. When you use just JavaScript without jQuery, that's vanilla JavaScript. Many of the expensive boot camps out there focus heavily on certain popular libraries. This is a good strategy if you're on an extremely compressed timeline. However, I think that becoming more skilled at the base language is actually more important. Yes, knowing React will open jobs to you. However, it'll be easier to learn React and use it correctly if you're more skilled in vanilla JavaScript. Tip number 6, find a study group and an accountability partner. Learning to code on your own is tough stuff, and it's much harder if you try totally alone. Self-taught doesn't mean by yourself. You can find a study group by attending some of the local coding meetups. Don't be afraid to tell people what you're doing and that you're looking for study partners. A good study group can meet regularly, either live or virtually, and help each other solve problems and stay on track. And speaking of staying on track, I also recommend you get an accountability partner. Someone who holds your feet to the fire and helps you reach your learning goals. You're more likely to achieve a goal if you share that goal with others. Your accountability partner can help make sure you don't get distracted or off track and are making progress towards your larger goal of becoming a professional developer. And finally, tip 7, focus on application, not memorization. So here's a secret. Coding is an open book test. Most developers work with the documentation open. It's much more important that you understand how different functions work rather than memorizing their syntax. I often have to look up the correct name of a function or what the function requires for parameters and what it returns when I'm coding. I've been writing code for 35 years and I have a pretty deep understanding of how languages work, but I have very little memorized. You'll find that as you become more experienced that things will become automatic and you will memorize code, but that's not really the point. Strive to apply and understand, and don't worry about memorizing anything. Leave that space in your brain for something useful. That's it, 7 tips to help you become a self-taught software engineer. If you liked this video and found it helpful, please click the like button to help the channel grow. Check out the links below in the description for access to free training videos with projects, courses, and workshops. Also, I hope you'll check out our online membership program, where we train you and get you ready for your first job as a developer. Just $9.95 a month. Thanks for watching.